Today, we're going to get into a topic that's, well, pretty complicated and honestly often really misunderstood. We're talking about the relationship between race, our DNA, and what happens in the doctor's office.
So just imagine this for a second. You go to your doctor, you have a health concern, and you're told you don't even need a test because, and this is a direct quote from a real doctor to a patient, quote, "Blacks do not get osteoporosis." It's a shocking thing to hear, right? And it's the key that unlocks a much bigger and frankly a much more dangerous story.
So you have to wonder, why would a medical professional, someone trained in science, actually believe this? This isn't just some simple mistake. It's a symptom of a really deep-seated myth that has very real and very harmful consequences in medicine today. And it turns out, this one incident, it's not an isolated case at all. It actually points to a dangerous medical myth, one that shows what happens when these broad assumptions that we make about race lead to direct harm.
Let's just break down how this myth actually works. The common belief is that black women, on average, have higher bone density, so they're not really at risk. But the fact is, many black women absolutely do develop osteoporosis. And because this belief is so common, they're often diagnosed much later. The consequence of that? It's devastating. African American women are more likely to die after a hip fracture. And this all stems from poor screening and, get this, risk calculators that doctors use, like the FRAX tool, which actually adjusts a patient's risk score down if they are identified as black. So the bias is literally baked right into the diagnostic tools.
All of this forces us to ask a really fundamental question. If race is being used this way in medicine, what does our DNA actually have to say about it? Well, the scientific answer might surprise you. The category that we call race, it just isn't written in our genes.
Now, to really get this, we need to be on the same page about one key concept: genetic variation. It sounds complicated, but it's really just all the tiny little differences in our DNA that make each and every one of us unique. The big question, though, is how are those differences spread out across the entire human species?
And this right here illustrates the answer perfectly. Way back in 1972, a biologist named Richard Lewontin did this landmark study, and what he found was incredible. A massive 85% of all human genetic variation exists within any single local population, so like within the French or within the Japanese. Only a tiny fraction, about 7%, is what accounts for the average differences between what we call races. To put it simply, race is a terrible proxy for genetic diversity.
Here's a really great way to think about it. Since modern humans evolved in Africa and then migrated out to the rest of the world, the vast majority of human genetic diversity is still found on the African continent. This means that pretty much all the genetic variation you'd find in Europe and Asia is basically just a subset of what's already in Africa. It's like a set of Russian nesting dolls. All the other dolls fit right inside that first African doll.
Let's look at a classic example: sickle cell anemia. In the United States, it's often called a black disease. But that is a profound misunderstanding. The sickle cell trait is actually common in any population that evolved where malaria was widespread, because having the trait offers a survival advantage against malaria. So we see it not just in parts of Africa, but all across the Mediterranean, Arabia, and India. It's a trait of geography and evolution, not social race.
So if race isn't a biological category, then where on earth did the idea even come from? Well, it turns out race is an invention, a powerful social idea that, much later, was given a flawed, official-looking scientific stamp of approval.
You know, this concept wasn't born from science. Back in 17th century America, when European and African laborers were actually uniting in rebellions, colony leaders created these racial divisions based on appearance just to maintain control. Then, a century later, the famous taxonomist Carl Linnaeus tried to classify humans, but he mixed physical traits with these crude social stereotypes. He described Europeans as being governed by law and Asians as being ruled by opinion. And that flawed thinking, it is still with us today, embedded in medical tools we use right now.
Okay, so this brings us to the most critical distinction of all. On one hand, you have geographic ancestry. That is biological. It's tied to where your ancestors lived, and it can help explain certain genetic traits. On the other hand, you have social race. That's a cultural construct. It's based on appearance and societal labels, and it does not map cleanly onto biology at all. So one is scientific and real, and the other is social, but it is also very real in its consequences.
All right, so if the health gaps that we see between different racial groups aren't actually caused by their genes, then what is the cause?
The real causes are rooted in our environment and our society.
I'm talking about things like having less access to quality medical care or less access to healthy food and secure housing. There's also this powerful concept called weathering. It's the long-term physical toll that the chronic stress of racism takes on the body, which can lead to conditions like high blood pressure. These are the downstream effects of a long, long history of discrimination.
And the impact of this is it's stark. In the United States, babies born to black women are more than twice as likely to die in their first year as babies born to white women. This isn't a genetic tragedy, it's a societal one, and it shows just how deeply these factors can affect our most basic biological outcomes.
So where does all of this leave us? Well, it really comes down to one central idea. Race is absolutely real in its impact on people's lives. But that reality isn't rooted in our genetics. And understanding that difference, that is the critical first step.
If you take just one thing away from this whole explainer, let it be this sentence. Race is a social construct with biological consequences. It's an idea that we created as a society. But that idea has shaped our world in ways that literally get under the skin and affect our health and our well-being.
The anthropologist Alan Goodman, whose work informed a lot of what we've talked about, he puts it just perfectly. He says, race is real. It just isn't genetic. It's a culturally created phenomenon. This distinction is the key to better science and hopefully a more just society.
For centuries, medicine has tried to address health disparities by looking at what it thought was the cause, genetics. It's been looking in the wrong place, and it just leaves you to wonder, what happens when we finally shift our focus and start treating the right one?